I'm Hallie Jackson, and we are coming on the air with a breaking news special report on this historic day for former President Trump. The split screen, two huge court fights in two different cities on two different cases. One here in Washington, where the Supreme Court set to issue a ruling for the ages, in the words of one justice, and a ruling that could determine the fate of the federal case against Mr. Trump. But we will begin in New York, where we've just heard from the former president himself after he heard plenty from David Pecker, this man, tabloid king, former head of the National Enquirer, describing all the ways he tried to stop Mr. Trump from being humiliated ahead of the 2016 election, telling a jury about the payments that he helped facilitate to catch and then kill stories, this catch and kill scheme, like this $150,000 that went to a former Playboy model, Karen McDougal. Pecker says Mr. Trump's former fixer, Michael Cohen, made those payments because he says we didn't want the story to embarrass Mr. Trump or to embarrass the campaign. Pecker also admitted he lied to the Wall Street Journal about paying off McDougal because, quoting here, I wanted to protect Donald Trump, he said. But Pecker also said he did not want to pay Stormy Daniels, who Mr. Trump denies having an affair with, saying, I do not want the National Enquirer associated with a porn star. Remember what's at stake here. Donald Trump facing 34 criminal charges for lying on business records. The Manhattan DA says that is evidence of illegal election interference. Mr. Trump said he did nothing wrong, nothing illegal. So what we're doing tonight, right now, it's a little bit different. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to take you inside all the rooms cameras could not be in. If you weren't glued to every note, every word coming out of court, if you had other things to do, we didn't. And we got you. The next half hour is all you need as our team of reporters, legal experts, political pros from D.C. to New York help break down what went down, why it matters, and what is next. Let's start with Vaughn Hilliard, who is live outside that downtown Manhattan courtroom. And let's start with maybe just the last hour or so, as we're getting the first hints at how the Trump team, the defense, is going to try and discredit the argument that prosecutors are making, Vaughn.
Right. Number one, Hallie, the prosecutors, with their cross-examination of Donald Trump, they are trying to not only question his credibility, the extent to which that he is working with the prosecution too much. Of course, it came out today that he had had an immunity agreement with prosecutors dating back to 2019. They're also calling into question his memory about events that have unfolded over all of these years. And at one point, they were making the suggestion that Donald Trump and David Pecker had long had this relationship dating back to the 1990s about the National Enquirer, that this was not something that just came to be in 2015 when Donald Trump announced his run for the presidency, but instead when he was, leading The Apprentice and Celebrity Apprentice, he'd feed secret information to the National Enquirer, and in exchange, the National Enquirer would sometimes not print negative stories about him. So this is where, the prosecution is going to be able to bring a laundry list of witnesses forward, but this is the moment where the defense team begins that opportunity to cross-examine the very witnesses that the prosecution contends are going to be key to their case.
So, Vaughn, one of the things we talked about here, right? No cameras in court. Everything is coming into us from our team, getting in there, typing up some notes with these key quotes. And one that stands out is the exchange we're about to show folks. Pecker basically says, who's going to pay for this Karen McDougal story? Pecker says, Michael Cohen, don't worry, the boss responds, a.k.a. Donald Trump, will take care of it. Help us understand why Pecker saying that is so important to what the Manhattan DA wants to prove here.
Exactly. What the Manhattan DA is looking to show this jury is that Donald Trump and Michael Cohen were very well aware of the scheme that they were trying to have take place. And what Michael Cohen was continually promising David Pecker and American media was that they were going to pay Donald Trump and Michael Cohen, were going to pay him back for an $150,000 payment to Karen McDougal, the former Playboy model who alleged in a 10-month affair to Donald Trump. And over the course of months, well, Donald Trump and Michael Cohen never handed over the money, but he continually, Michael Cohen says that the boss will take care of this here. And now ultimately, as testimony went on, there was disagreement and frustration. And ultimately, David Pecker said, you know what? We don't need the money. We're just going to hold on to the rights of it ourselves, Hallie.
Vaughn, thank you very much. Appreciate you being out there. We're going to check back in with you, I know, as we get more coming in. Let's talk about some of the legal implications here. NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos, along with legal analyst Catherine Christian, both joining us here. Okay, so Danny, I tip your defense attorney hat to you here. Let's start there. Read the tea leaves on where Trump's team is going with this cross-examination of David Pecker so far.
No surprises. I predicted they had the limited traditional angles that they'd have to pursue, and here they are. They're challenging his memory, they're challenging his motive, and this is classic with a cooperating witness type like David Pecker. You met with the prosecution many times, implying that he's hand in hand with the prosecution and that he's up there willing to say or do anything the prosecution wants so that he can be the beneficiary of that immunity deal. He has a deal. He's performing for the people who will decide if they like or think he did a good job on his end of the deal. And that, of course, is the people. That's just standard fare when you're cross-examining someone who is like a cooperating witness, like David Pecker is. Of course, challenge his memory, challenge his motive to lie. All of the standards, they've gone there.
Dana, can I ask you something else? Because there's a piece of new information that we learned from Pecker's testimony here, that there was an agreement that he signed in 2019. That is before the current Manhattan DA, before Alvin Bragg was in the position he was in, that basically gave him and the parent company, the National Enquirer, immunity. Why is that impactful here? Explain why that's an interesting piece of new information.
For the same reason, it's interesting that he signed a deal with local prosecutors, that any deal you make with the prosecution and any benefit you're getting from the prosecution can be used on cross-examination to show that that's your motive. You're up there saying whatever they want you to say because they decide if you've complied with the terms of your agreement. Defense attorneys do not have that power. We cannot go to a witness and say, hey, let's enter into some kind of deal so you give us your testimony. We're not allowed to do that. Now, obviously, prosecutors in fairness, like Catherine Christian, she will correctly say that all they're doing is they're told to tell the truth. All the prosecutors always tell them, you're only here to tell the truth, and they vet them beforehand. So this is just standard cross-examination of a cooperating witness. So far, it's gone exactly the way I expected it to, and no surprises.
So, Catherine, with Pecker being potentially the star witness here, did the prosecution get what they needed to out of him?
I think they have. Now, he has described himself as the eyes and ears of the campaign for Donald Trump. Well, for the prosecutors, he was the eyes and ears for the jury to the conspiracy, the alleged conspiracy to promote Donald Trump's election by unlawful means. So he provided the whole background, the narrative from beginning to the end. I mean, it started before the campaign, and it ended in the White House with him, Donald Trump thanking him. So he provided all the necessary testimony that they want, particularly the end of his testimony when he said, Donald Trump is a mentor, I still have goodwill. That establishes for the prosecution that he has no bias or hostility like Michael Cohen has against Donald Trump.
I was just about to ask you on that because he says, and I want to quote for people what David Pecker said, I felt that Donald Trump was my mentor. He helped me throughout my career. At one point, he called him a friend. He said they hadn't talked in a while, but that he still considers him a friend. And Catherine, you say that is so critical because the prosecution wants to establish to the jury that this is not a guy who's coming out here with an axe to grind against former President Trump.
Exactly. He didn't, unlike Michael Cohen, wrote a big book called Revenge.
Right.
He's just here telling the truth, albeit to a cooperation agreement, and he was his authentic self. He's checkbook journalism. You can call him sleazy, but he owns it. He doesn't show any remorse. He owns that. So he's credible because he's so candid about what he's done and what he has said.
But then, Danny, you maybe have to forgive the jury if they were a little starstruck because what you heard was a whole bunch of famous names that came up. Tiger Woods, Mark Wahlberg, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't know if Rahm Emanuel, the former Chicago mayor, is in that category as well, but certainly a famous name. Point is, all examples of stories that they purchased, and it seems like the goal is that Donald Trump didn't get any special treatment. That's the point they're trying to make, that this was just standard operating procedure at the tabloid.
Exactly right. So if David Pecker did this for everyone and all of those other people were not running for president, and this happened all the time, and of course, if this is something he would have done for Trump no matter what, and he did say, Pecker did testify, he did it for him personally and also for the campaign, if they can develop that in cross and get the jury to question what the real motive was for these catch-and-kill stories, then they might start to create some reasonable doubt. But David Pecker did say on direct that he did it for the campaign.
Yeah. Danny Savalos, Catherine Christian, our NBC News legal analyst, thank you so much for being with us for this sort of day look at this Donald Trump hush money trial in Manhattan. Appreciate it. I want to get the vibe from inside the courtroom. Our Tom Winter was there. He has made his way outside. Now the court has concluded. He is joining us now from New York. It was interesting, Tom, just to pull back the curtain a little bit. There's a whole way, this whole series of ways that our team inside court is taking notes so that all of us outside court can see it. And based on some of what you were putting in, it was really interesting how locked in Donald Trump seemed to be. Jury selection, I think it was clear he was looking down at points, he was looking away at points. He was like lasering in on David Pecker, including when Pecker was talking about some of the more like spicy details. Talk us through it.
Oh, that's exactly right, Hallie. And just to your point about getting the information out of the courtroom, you know, in the past, and I remember my first trial here, Martha Stewart, we came out holding red placards if she was guilty or green if she was not guilty. So we've come a long way in that we have instantaneous notes and quotes coming from the courtroom. And what those notes and quotes and color notes are telling us, and what I saw today in that courtroom, is a defendant, the former president of the United States and the leading candidate for the Republican Party, definitely focused on his friend. And as a matter of fact, David Pecker described Donald Trump, even though he says he hasn't talked to him in a number of years, as his friend. And so it makes sense today that Trump would want to be focused on his testimony, number one. But two, this has moved beyond the legal arguments. You know, some of these pretrial hearings, if you're not into the legalese of this case and you're not into the finer points, whether it's involving Donald Trump or anybody else, it can be a little bit of a slog if you're an attorney. But if you're the person who's on trial and now there's evidence and testimony, and now that evidence and testimony involves specific conversations that you and the person on the stand are having, it makes complete sense that we saw the former president absolutely dialed in today on what they were talking about, on what David Pecker had to say.
How about the jury?
Yeah, definitely a focused jury today. You know, they had the, I call it the tennis match effect, going back and forth from the prosecution to the witness to whoever is testifying. So they were clearly focused on that, clearly focused on the screens in front of them when they were looking at text messages, letters, agreements, the very essence and heart of this case, which prosecutors, I think, would say are the star witnesses, which are the documents.
Tom Winter, live for us there in downtown Manhattan. Tom, thank you so much. Let's talk about that other key legal issue for former President Trump today, and that is the Supreme Court case, that critical set of oral arguments that he says he wanted to be at in the last half hour, saying that he thinks his team made their case. Listen to this.
I think it was made clear, I hope it was made clear, that a president has to have immunity, or you don't have a president, or at most you can say it would be a ceremonial president. That's not what the founders had in mind.
Okay, so remember, the question here in front of the Supreme Court is about immunity. Should Donald Trump basically be protected from criminal prosecution for stuff he did while president? Here's the bottom line. The justices sounded pretty skeptical about giving him some kind of broad, blanket, absolute immunity. But reading the tea leaves, it doesn't necessarily sound like they're all that ready to make some definitive decision either. And that is the first big question. What are they going to rule? There's a lot of gray area between total immunity on the one hand and zero immunity on the other. Then, almost as important, when will they rule? Because delay, that is part of the game here for Donald Trump. If he can get a trial pushed back until after the November election, when he may or may not be in the White House. Laura Jarrett was inside the Supreme Court for oral arguments today. We're so glad to have you. It has been a busy stretch for you this week, friend. Seriously. So talk us through it, right? Let's start with the arguments here and reading the tea leaves from where the justices lean.
So they're almost in completely different universes as it relates to what's the scary thing that could happen. For the liberals, the idea that you would completely immunize a president would give them license for all kinds of mischief. For the conservatives, if you don't provide some immunity, not complete blanket immunity, as he's arguing, but if you don't provide some immunity, then they can't do their jobs. And as Justice Alito pointed out, they're making all kinds of tough decisions. They're under a lot of pressure. And the idea that someone could come along after the fact and be criminally prosecuted for a snap judgment they thought was unfair. But I think the way that Ketanji Brown Jackson, Justice Jackson, laid it out really sort of encapsulizes that debate. Let's take a listen to this.
I'm trying to understand what the disincentive is from turning the Oval Office into, the seat of criminal activity in this country.
So for her, the fact that presidents have known up until this point that they could be prosecuted once they're not in office has kept them from committing crimes.
The other piece of this that the justices really drilled down on that relates to this is the idea of what is done in the private capacity of a person who's in the White House versus what is done as their official capacity as president here, right? That is so much of what's at hand. Because, yeah, there seems to be broad agreement. You know, private stuff, sure, you can be prosecuted. Official stuff, well, certain official things, that's where this question mark is in. And it was interesting to hear Justice Amy Coney Barrett get this pretty key concession out of the former president's attorney. I want to play that here. Yeah.
So you concede that private acts don't get immunity?
We do.
And there's a whole list of examples here. So, for example, according to the former president's attorney, an official act would be like, say, when he called the Arizona House Speaker about claims of election fraud. Private is when he called private attorneys who helped spread his election fraud lies.
Yeah.
This is at the heart.
This is a problem, at least for the special counsel's office, because if he's right about that and there's this blending of private and presidential, then the justices could very well send it back down to the trial court and say, trial court Judge Chutkan, you work out what's public versus what's presidential, in which case this is delayed. It cannot go to trial before the November election.
And that is exactly what Donald Trump, at least in part, wants to see.
Yes.
Can you give us a vibe check inside the room?
It's interesting. Jack Smith was there. I had never seen him before in person at counsel table. He often sits in sort of the back rows, but he's never been actually at counsel table before. He's jocular.
He was alongside his attorney.
He's with the attorneys. He's laughing with them before the arguments. Very familiar, very at ease. I had never seen him like that before in such a sort of staid, serious setting.
That's super interesting. Laura Jarrett, we're going to look for more of your reporting coming up tonight on Nightly. Thank you for being with us for this special coverage.
Of course.
Let's break down more of this with Michelle Goodwin, a constitutional law professor at Georgetown Law. So, where do we go from here, right? Because you've got Justice Gorsuch, who's on the more conservative end of the spectrum, trying to put this whole thing into a bigger context. Let me play that.
I'm not concerned about this case, but I am concerned about future uses of the criminal law to target political opponents based on accusations about their motives.
And this is what is so critical, I think, to this story, Michelle. This is not simply about this particular former president at this particular moment. This is a potentially generational ruling that will affect presidents for decades to come.
Well, that's what Justice Gorsuch said, that this is a monumental case, once-in-a-lifetime case. But let's be clear that what Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson suggested is that this is a case that was brought about this question of absolute immunity. And she was very clear that the court should not get distracted from that being brought before the court and not these other issues, including future hypotheticals of future presidents, but that very specifically this case and the facts in this case were the ones that were before the court to handle this question. Does a president, is absolute immunity something that a former president is owed?
What do you make of how both sides argued the case today? Do you think there was something that either side could have done to make their arguments perhaps more forceful, more convincing in front of a panel of justices who were very quick, eager, and willing to interrupt, to push them, to try to test out the limits of their arguments?
Well, that's right, and that's something typical that Supreme Court justices will do in any case, so that's not unusual to this. But what was unusual were kind of strategies that were placed into argumentation today by the Trump legal team. Originally, they started out by saying that the former president had absolute immunity and that any president would, past, present, or future. They claimed that the acts done by the president had all been official kinds of acts that should be protected. Today, they had a different kind of strategy, and their strategy was to lean into there needing to be some discernment between what was official and what were private acts. And the only way to do that, and what would be appropriate in American law, is for that to be taken up by a district court judge, which, as you noted, is something that would buy the former president time, which is what he would want, given that this is an election year.
And as we talk about timing, right, it's not like this is the only case. It is a huge case in front of the justices. It is obviously not their only one this term. They've got 43 related to not this one, but just this one, but to guns, to abortion access, to gerrymandering, opioids, January 6th, the list goes on. It is possible that, you know, term ends, what, late June, sometimes even dipping into a little bit of early July. Decision comes down, and then what happens next? What are the practical implications?
Well, the practical implications include the fact that the Supreme Court decided to take this case up only recently. They would have had the opportunity to have done this earlier, and by doing so, that actually delays the start of the trial, which was supposed to be in March. And here we are in April. They could issue a ruling perhaps in July, and it means that ultimately this is a case that doesn't begin when it was expected, and it perhaps has some interference with the 2024 presidential election.
Michelle Goodwin, we're so glad to have you. Thank you very much for your analysis, for your insight on this special coverage. Appreciate it. That brings us to the next point, that this is more than just a legal conversation. It is obviously a political one. I want to bring in now Hogan Gidley, former press secretary for Mr. Trump at the White House, deputy principal press secretary, I believe, and in his 2020 campaign. Amisha Cross, Democratic strategist, is joining us as well. It's a collision course, Amisha and Hogan, as we talk about often, for Donald Trump, right? The legal issues, his political campaign, it is basically one and the same at this point. We know that during the primary election, he got a boost, the former president did. Whenever he faced an indictment, whenever something was in the news about his legal problems, he sent out this fundraising email telling people to meet him for a tour of Mar-a-Lago, quote, before it's too late, meaning before they throw him in jail. What is it that makes him think that this is something that a general election audience wants to hear? Because remember, we are no longer in the primary. He needs to win over that small slice of independent voters if he wants a chance at winning the White House.
Well, 66% of people in this country believe these attacks are politically motivated. 56% of those voters also believe that Joe Biden is part of it. That's a real problem for the left, because when you take a look at the federal government, the weaponization of three-letter agencies, the judicial system, the way it's gone after a particular person who just so happens to not only be Joe Biden's chief political rival, but someone who's ahead of him in the polls, people don't like that. There's a fairness issue I think a lot of people disagree with. Donald Trump, for his credit, has come out in between these hearings and basically said to the public, here's what's wrong with Joe Biden. Here are the problems we face in this country. It's all Joe Biden's fault, which is a good strategy for him because obviously the cameras are focused on him. He's sucking all the oxygen out of the campaign, and he's focused his comments on those people who are suffering because of Joe Biden. That's a smart thing for him to do. Now, whether that plays out over time, depending on how these cases go, that's a completely different conversation. But right now, he's winning the day. The
Biden campaign would take exception to that, looking at, for example, yesterday when court was not in session and Donald Trump was not on the campaign trail. And Amisha, we heard from sort of Team Biden slamming him for golfing instead yesterday, instead of being on the campaign trail, saying, and I'm quoting here, this is from the spokesperson from the Biden camp, when your entire campaign is about enacting revenge and retribution for yourself and doing nothing to make Americans' lives better, it makes sense, they say, you wouldn't feel the need to actually speak to voters. Is this the right strategy for the Biden camp?
I think so, because every day that Donald Trump is not on the campaign trail, he's not getting those voters that he needs. We know that Donald Trump cannot win in November with just a MAGA base. He has to expand. And to that point, it is very difficult for him because he can't keep up the strongman face. He's falling asleep in court. He's seeming, his age is clearly apparent at this point. You have people on Fox News talking about how cold it is, acting like he's somehow being tortured when he's facing a criminal trial in the same way that anybody else facing a criminal trial would do. But I think that because he's so far behind when it comes to fundraising, he's not bringing out the crowds that he used to. There aren't throngs of people waiting outside of that courtroom, holding up signs and cheering Donald Trump on. He's in a very different position right now. And to a point you made a moment ago, this is general election time. We are outside of the primary. He's got to have a game plan, and he can't have a game plan and fight these cases at the same time. That's been proven.
I see you nodding, and I want to put some numbers behind this, Hogan, because I want to hear what you have to say from the sort of the conservative perspective here. A majority, new polling shows that many Americans do actually think that these particular charges, this set of charges, the ones in New York, are serious, and it's not just driven by Democrats, right? You're looking at independents, you're looking at white Americans who are not college educated. That is a big part of the former president's base. Even a third of Republicans say they have some kind of an issue with these charges. At what point do you think the campaign needs to start sweating this a little bit more than maybe they are?
I don't know if they need to sweat it at all, only because of where the case stands right now. We'll cross the bridge when we come to it. If there happens to be a conviction, which I don't think there'll be, then we'll have that conversation. Okay. But the fact is, it tells so much that Joe Biden issued a statement about Donald Trump playing golf when half of his presidency, if not more, has been on the beach in Delaware. But in addition to that, he didn't say anything about his policies working and how they contrast with Donald Trump. He just said he's golfing. In between all of my political prosecutions and my judicial prosecutions on Donald Trump, he happens to go play golf. Big deal. The American people didn't have a problem with Donald Trump playing golf when they had a better economy, when they had low crime, when they had a sane southern border solution and policies, and the world wasn't on fire. Wildfire. So the entire race, quite frankly, is going to come down to these issues and these policies. This stuff right now is really not permeating into a majority of the American people's minds. They're definitely not paying attention to it. Now, when rulings come down, they're going to be paying attention to that for sure.
So it sounds like you're laying out the grain of salt caveat that let's see what happens when some of these trials, this at least first trial, gets completed here. Amisha, you're making the point. It's about policy that Americans care about. And we know polling shows they care about inflation, they care about immigration. Those are the two biggest issues that polling shows again and again in recent months people want to hear about. President Biden, just these last couple of weeks, has focused, for example, on the economy, has done several events on that front, hasn't talked a lot about the former president's legal issues, pretty intentionally. Do you think that's the right move?
Absolutely, because I do think that Hogan was right when it comes to the priorities for the general electorate.
Well, Hogan loves to hear that.
They are here on the economy. They want to know whether or not they're going to be able to afford housing next month. These are the issues that are the top burner issues for the American public. So I think that having Joe Biden out here focusing in on that, talking about what his infrastructure plan is doing for states across the country, having him out here amplifying the jobs, how the economy is moving forward, talking to people where they are is going to be a lot more effective because the average person is not sitting at home following this trial all day. They are caring about whether or not they're going to be able to make rent next month.
If you have not been following that trial all day, that's why we got you right here. This 30 minutes of special coverage on NBC News Now. Hogan, Amisha, thank you both so much. Really appreciate you both being with us. We have a lot of other big headlines, not just this one to catch you up on. We will when we pick up our regular programming right here on NBC News Now. We're going to sneak in a quick break. We'll see you right after. Tonight's shock and pain over a Me Too milestone undone. The emotional tidal wave hitting Harvey Weinstein's accusers and alleged survivors after New York's top court overturned his rape conviction. We're live with what comes next in the case. Plus, hail the size of softballs. The tornado risk skyrocketing. Why millions are bracing for the worst of the weather the Midwest has had in 5 years. And why the stakes and the salaries at this year's NFL draft are higher than ever, with the big night for big players set to start just hours from now. Then why they're turning to a hurricane on wheels, as they call it, to fight fires in Colorado. That's coming up a little bit later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and tonight, new fallout after the bombshell rulings overturning one of the most monumental decisions in the Me Too movement, Harvey Weinstein's rape conviction. That's because an appeals court in New York ruled the judge in that 2020 trial made some mistakes. And the biggest one, letting women testify about allegations against Weinstein that were not part of the actual charges he faced. To be crystal clear here, folks, Harvey Weinstein is not a free man. He is staying behind bars. He's got that 16-year sentence for rape in California he's been convicted on. But here's what this whole thing probably does mean. A new trial for him in New York. They may do it all again. And the women who shared their stories on the stand may have to do that all again as well. Remember, Weinstein's downfall was basically the biggest domino, one of them, in this chain reaction that was the Me Too movement. And now critics say this is a step in the wrong direction.
This is what it's like to be a woman in America, living with male entitlement to our bodies. This today is an act of institutional betrayal.
One well-known case does not define this movement.
Now, you will not be surprised to learn that Weinstein's lawyers see it differently. They say that this moment is an indication that the justice system works.
I don't care who the defendant is. If it's a former president of the United States or the most storied Hollywood producer of our generation, the law applies to everyone. No one is above the law, but no one is below the law either.
I want to bring in Chloe Malas now for more. And Chloe, you covered this trial when it happened. It was a trial that in so many ways served as the front, the face of the Me Too movement. Talk us through some of the reaction now at the courthouse from pretty much everybody on all sides of this thing.
I mean, listen, Hallie, I sat, like you said, in that courtroom every single day during Harvey Weinstein's New York criminal trial. I even interviewed him ahead of the trial. And You know, the Mullineaux witnesses were a tough thing to go around. You know, the defense obviously didn't want the Mullineaux witnesses, these women who were going to be testifying about Harvey's bad character. And this is where we've gotten that a court has, the highest court has now overturned the conviction because they feel as though it tainted the trial. But will the Manhattan District Attorney's Office move forward and try him all over again? That is going to be a monumental lift. We have heard, obviously we heard from Ashley Judd, who has been incredibly vocal about Harvey Weinstein and others in the Me Too movement just now. But we've also heard from some of the attorneys that represent some of the accusers who testified. One of those is Douglas H. Wigdor, and he says today's decision is a major step back in holding those accountable for acts of sexual violence. Lisa Goldbrum says that this ruling is a leap backward for the rule of law. Today's ruling unfortunately casts a dark shadow on their bravery and will undoubtedly deter future sexual assault victims from coming forward. And then also, there is a woman by the name of Dawn Dunning. She testified during this trial as Jane Doe 3. And, you know, she says that she had to relive the trauma of the assault every day. It took 2 years of her life to prepare for this trial. So again, it begs the question, Hallie, would these women do it all over again?
So will they? What are the chances that there will be another trial, Chloe?
So in the next couple of days, according to Weinstein's attorneys today at that press conference that I was at, they said that they should have some more information, that they're trying to get Harvey Weinstein some much-needed, supposedly medical treatment that he needs. But, you know, we could see him extradited to California at some point to start serving that 16-year sentence. And his legal team is looking to appeal that sentence as well. They truly believe, though, Hallie, that he one day will be a free man and out of jail.
Chloe Melas, we're glad to have you. Thank you very much for your reporting again on this really bombshell set of rulings. Appreciate it. To weather now, because tonight what's expected to be the most active and dangerous stretch of storms that the Midwest and Texas have seen in years, with millions of people bracing for hail the size of softballs or maybe tornadoes potentially hitting after dark. And you know that's when twisters are twice as likely to be deadly. We're talking Dallas, Kansas City. It could all last through the weekend. Meteorologist Bill Cairns is tracking it. This is an area of the country that has been getting absolutely slammed lately. Talk us through what the expectation is.
Yeah, 4 days, Hallie. This is going to last right through the weekend. The bookends are kind of the smaller days. But as we go through tomorrow and Saturday, those are the days that we're going to have high population centers at risk of supercell thunderstorms and possibly tornadoes. So obviously that, you know, ups the ante. So here's what we're dealing with currently. This is the storm responsible for the next 2 days of severe weather. We do have a tornado watch that includes portions of Kansas, Nebraska, and a little sliver there of Colorado. That goes until 9 o'clock. And things all of a sudden are getting a little more active. The good news, this is a very rural area. We got two highways, 70 and 76. There's not a lot in between. So you may see a lot of pictures, you know, in the next 24 hours of tornadoes that form in the next couple of, you know, in the next 2 to 3 hours. But hopefully they won't hit anything because there's not a lot to hit out in this region. So we do have severe thunderstorm watches, but this one that just turned into a warning for a tornado. The storm spotters out here have confirmed a tornado on the ground. So here's Fort Morgan, Colorado, and this is 76, and it is tracking in that general direction. It looks like it should barely miss Akron, Colorado, but we'll keep an eye on that. Again, active observed tornado there. We don't know how big or how strong at this point. Now, as we go through tomorrow, we take this storm and we're going to take it into some bigger population centers, Omaha, Des Moines, Ames, the Kansas City area, Columbia. This area is where we expect the best chance of strong storms and possibly even a few strong tornadoes. This little hatched area shows where the favorability is for at least maybe if we get an EF2 tornado or stronger. Those are the ones that can just destroy a home instead of just, you know, damaging the roof or knocking down trees. And isolated storms from Dallas northwards. Then by the time we get to Saturday, a new storm forms and sends more storms over I-35, Oklahoma City to Wichita, back up to Topeka and Kansas City. So it's multiple days in the same area. So not only do we have to worry about severe weather, but Hallie, when you get this many storms, this many days in a row in the same spots, we're going to get flooding concerns. And we already are looking at a moderate risk of flash flooding from Wichita Falls, Texas, all the way back up to Tulsa and a little sliver here, including Oklahoma City. So yes, the severe weather is going to get all the headlines, but flash floodings also could surprise some people, especially as we head through the weekend if you're not paying attention.
Lots to watch. You'll have a busy Friday, I'm sure. Bill Cairns, thank you. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, new reporting out tonight from Reuters suggesting TikTok's Chinese-based owner would rather shut it down than sell it off, according to 4 sources talking to that outlet. That's if the company's legal fight is not successful against the new law President Biden just signed that gives ByteDance up to a year to spin off TikTok or face a ban. Number 2, Tupac's estate now threatening to sue Drake. That's because Drake just put out a song that seems to use an AI-generated version of Tupac's voice. The estate is calling this, I'm quoting here, a blatant abuse of Tupac's legacy. Drake's rep declined to comment. Number 3, Southwest Airlines says it's going to cut back how many people it's hiring and stop flying to 4 airports because of a slowdown in getting planes from Boeing and because of some of its own financial struggles. This is the first time Southwest has pulled out of any airport since 2019. Number 4, big new audio version of all 7 Harry Potter books is headed to Audible. Variety says more than 100 actors will be involved. Full cast. We don't know who yet, but the release should be late next year. Number 5, check out this new image. Just we're getting in. Is this spiders on Mars? Ugh, kind of looks like it, right? But the European Space Agency says, nah, not quite. These little splotches are basically from gas geysers that shoot up during springtime on Mars, then splash back down. A lot more to still come on the show, including our live reports from campus where pro-Palestinian protests are continuing on. They are spreading, with one school even canceling commencement. We're getting into it. Plus, a bus driver fighting off an attack. Look at that. We're going to explain what exactly is happening, in this one. So right as we were coming on the air, the University of Southern California, USC, says it will cancel its big main commencement ceremony because of this dramatic escalation between pro-Palestinian protesters and police on campus. Something student activists are saying not too long ago is unacceptable. Listen.
These are incomprehensible accounts of police brutality, co-signed and facilitated by the USC administration, that turned our campus into a militarized zone.
I want to show you some of the footage here, these intense clashes between protesters and security officers. You see it there. Police say nearly 100 people have been arrested, and it's coming as these new encampments are popping up all across the country on college campuses tonight. Look at this map here. You're seeing it from coast to coast. And look on the right side of your screen, George Washington University, an unusually large police presence there with students, faculty, staff forming a kind of human chain around the encampment.
Free, free, free Palestine!
Over at UCLA on the West Coast, the school is restricting access to certain parts of campus. And then in this video, you see Emory University. It's a protester, taken by a protester, showing one person handcuffed on the ground being tased by officers. Now, we're also hearing from some of the organizers of these encampments that officers in some instances use pepper bullets, tear gas, stun guns. David Noriega is at UCLA's campus in Los Angeles. So let's start with what's happening on the West Coast. USC, UCLA, especially with this cancellation of commencement at USC. It's just not going to happen now. Talk us through it.
So, Hallie, the university made sure to communicate to students and parents that the smaller department commencement ceremonies where students actually walk up on the stage and get their diplomas, those are still happening. It's the main commencement ceremony where 65,000 people all gather in one place. That's been canceled. They say it's because of these security measures they're putting in place. They are not letting people onto campus unless they bought a ticket. They're screening people and bags. They have a clear bag policy. This didn't just start yesterday and today. It started when the university canceled the valedictorians' commencement speech for what they said were security reasons, but a lot of students say it's because of the valedictorians' publicized pro-Palestine views. Hallie?
It also started bubbling. I mean, I can hear it behind you. I can see it behind you, David, at UCLA. Tell us more about what that's like. It looks, I mean, listen, obviously hundreds of people out behind you there.
Yeah, so there's a pretty sharp contrast between how the UCs are responding to this here at UCLA and also in Berkeley up north, and how other private universities have responded. They have not called the police. They are allowing this encampment to, sit and flourish. The energy's been ramping up all day and into the afternoon. If you've been to one of these protest encampments, you've kind of been to all of them. Everything I'm seeing is perfectly peaceful. Students sitting around. They have a free library, signs, chanting, drums, etc. One thing I do think is worth mentioning is that a lot of the students here behind me and students involved in directly organizing this are Jewish and belong to Jewish organizations. I interviewed one of them, a grad student who belongs to a group called Jewish Voice for Peace. I asked him to respond to one of the main criticisms of these mobilizations, which is that they are anti-Semitic and make Jewish students on campus feel unsafe. Here's what he had to say.
When our collective understanding of anti-Semitism gets oriented around very valid criticism of Zionism and Israel and state violence and militarism, it leaves us woefully unprepared to deal with what is a really scary escalation of anti-Semitism.
Hallie, I think what we are watching happen before our very eyes in American society is a struggle over the definition of anti-Semitism and who gets to define it. Hallie?
David Noriega live for us there out in L.A. David, we're glad to have you there. Thank you for your reporting. NBC News covers hundreds of other stories every day, and because it can be tough to read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Northeast Bureau, officials say they arrested a Maryland high school teacher after he allegedly used AI to impersonate the school principal. Police say the recording included racist and anti-Semitic comments in the voice of his boss. This audio then went viral before police figured out it was fake. The school says the teacher's on paid administrative leave now, facing multiple charges. Out of our Midwest Bureau, take a look at this video out of Oklahoma. A bus passenger yelling at and then attacking the driver, pulling open that little plastic door thing after the driver said he couldn't get off until the next stop. I mean, did you see that? The bus kept moving the whole time. Then it crashed into this building here. It veered off the road. Fortunately, everybody's expected to be okay. That passenger is now in custody. And out of our Western Bureau, Reggie Bush in California today saying he manifested the return of his Heisman. Remember, Bush got his 2005 trophy back after having to forfeit it about a decade ago because of gifts he got as a player that violated NCAA rules at the time. Obviously, things have changed since then. Bush says he can't get to this or to the national championship by cheating. Coming up, speaking of football, everybody's watching it because, yes, the draft begins tonight with millions of dollars on the line. The money bigger than it's ever been. We're getting into the big business of pro ball in just a sec. Want to take you to Detroit tonight, where the stakes and the salaries at this year's NFL draft are higher than ever. Take a look at this live shot from the crowds downtown. There they are. Woo, that's a lot of people. The first pick's not even happening for a few hours yet. The Chicago Bears up first are expected to draft the guy you're about to see here, Caleb Williams, who experts think could be the next Patrick Mahomes. No pressure. Totally chill. Only a guy who won 3 Super Bowls in his first 6 years as a starter. That's already Hall of Fame territory. The Bears even traded their first-round pick from just 3 years ago, Justin Fields, so they could be in position to draft Williams. And this is a sign of a trend in the last few years, where the NFL is becoming all about the quarterback. In fact, it's possible the first 4 picks in the draft are going to be all QBs. That has never happened before. I want to bring in Steve Patterson. So, big deal, big moment for the NFL, and a big spotlight on quarterbacks, and especially on Caleb Williams.
Yeah, Caleb Williams is the truth. Imagine this, being so good that the team that wants you traded for a chance to get you 3 frickin' years ago. That's the situation with Caleb Williams. Chicago knew that this was coming. They traded their quarterback. They're like, let's get rid of him 3 years ago in anticipation of the possibility of maybe getting this guy. And he is the truth. I mean, so, looking at the trends of the NFL, one of the pieces for these big generational teams, the dynasties, is that they have generational talent at quarterback. You want a Brady. You want a John Elway. You want a Patrick Mahomes. And Mahomes is stylistically the closest thing we've seen to Caleb Williams, except at this point in his college career, Caleb Williams is even better. Hallie?
Which is bananas to think about here. The other trend that we've seen, Steve, because we like to kind of get the macro picture here on this show, as you know.
Sure.
The NFL is big business, and for these players, it is big money. It is life-changing money, not just for Caleb Williams, right, but for all the players here. Talk about that trend line that we've seen that seems to be fueled and driven by the intense interest in the NFL that keeps growing.
Yeah, I'm going to read some numbers, and after this, I don't want you to feel bad for anybody in the NFL ever again. Absolutely. The league minimum, just so you know, $750,000. That is just coming into the league. If you are a bench warmer's understudy of the bench warmer, that's how much money you make at a minimum. The average is $2.8 million, but look at this. These are the rounds in which you can expect the salary range, $12 to $38 million. That's probably for the first round pick, right? Somewhere around $40 million. And then all the way down in the 7th round, the last few rounds of the draft, $4 million. That is incredible money. I think it is even in more stark relief because of all this discussion about women's athletics, spurred, of course, by Caitlin Clark, looking at the WNBA, talking about her salary that, of course, doesn't account for all the NIL deals and other things that are going on to help those athletes. But it's, you know, it's ridiculous how much money they make. And it is because of this intense interest. Everybody watches the NFL. They love the NFL. You showed that crowd in Detroit. That is for people to watch essentially a screen of people walking up on stage for 30 seconds and then leaving. That's how crazy the interest is for that sport. It's wild. Hallie?
Yeah, and you're jealous of it, Steve, and I know you wish you had that assignment in Detroit.
Course.
Yeah.
I would trade anything to be there.
Go watch it on a different screen, friend. Maybe enjoy a beverage or two. Thank you, Steve Patterson. Appreciate it. After this, we are looking at whether it could be Hollywood to the rescue, perhaps, how Tinseltown special effects guys could end up being the real-life heroes when it comes to fighting fires. Tonight, new red flag warnings in Colorado. And remember, it's only spring. So with these stronger fires happening more often, is coming a demand for a new way to get a handle on them. Could the answer come from Hollywood? Maura Barrett takes us to the state, where a former special effects coordinator is trying something in Colorado typically found on movie sets.
Tonight, fears growing among fire officials that wildfire season is no longer only a few months long, but the whole year.
Now the deadliest wildfire.
Fast-moving wildfire.
Tana wildfire.
Fiery nightmares.
With one saying he has a 24/7 catastrophic wildfire mindset these days.
Any fires that we have that start here are going to go rapidly up the hillsides, get caught by heavy winds, and be blown east and grow exponentially fast.
Brett Gibson and Greg Schwab are both fire chiefs in Boulder County, Colorado, and they're looking for innovative new ways to fight fires that are spreading faster than usual.
What do you attribute that to?
We're getting hotter, drier, and windier. We're having more extreme weather.
Those conditions, unfortunately, creating the perfect recipe for Colorado's largest and most destructive fires in the last 4 years. Red flag warnings this spring already issued. In the U.S. alone, wildfires can cause up to $350 billion in damages annually, putting the pressure on the need to find new solutions for fire prevention and suppression. Steve Wolf, CEO of Team Wildfire, has caught the attention of fire officials with what he calls a hurricane on wheels. The idea sparked from his time as a Hollywood special effects coordinator.
We took technology that had been used to make weather on movie sets and converted that to a mobile platform so that firefighters could control the wind and the rain in the microclimate where they're fighting the fire.
This small jet engine, usually found on a military drone, can shoot mist, be it water or fire retardant, hundreds of miles per hour, reaching nearly 200 feet away.
So this would allow us to convert any fire truck that normally just squirts water. It flows up into the mist injection chamber, which has 180 microjets, all driving water into the center.
And then it just
And then the jet engine exhaust just pushes it out.
Is this also what combats all of the wind issues that they face?
That's right.
Because it's going faster.
Right, because you're pushing back with so much force, and because wind that has moisture in it weighs more, you can punch right into the inbound winds.
With input from the fire chiefs, Wolf plans to scale up in size to devices 50 times bigger to help fight fires across an array of landscapes.
I'm impatiently waiting to see the tractor-mounted big rig. Only because boys and big toys.
New tech like this developing across the country that can hopefully be used in conjunction with one another, like the LA Fire Department's Thermite RS-3, a robot used for complex structure fires, and Lockheed Martin's AI technology used to predict a fire's path.
How important is it that new technology continues to be developed given how much we're seeing in the changes of climate and the frequency of fires?
We embrace all technologies. We do want to prove them.
This is a very labor-intensive business, and everybody who's on the ground is at risk. Anything that we can do to reduce that, let's try it.
New tech now giving new hope to millions who find themselves under threats of massive wildfires every year.
Maura is back from her reporting trip. She is joining us now. Maura, you talk about new tech and new hope, but there is also a new timeline on this. It is not just like a post-summer heat kind of thing where we used to see wildfires spike. This is a threat that is year-round.
Exactly, Hallie. And the thing that firefighters focus on when it's happening year-round is the suppression when it's actually happening, right? But also the prevention leading up to it. And the tech that we showed you in that piece actually has the ability to use that same jet engine to spray water, fire retardant ahead of time on roads or in areas where wildfires can spread easily to prevent them from jumping back and forth. And so that's something that can also be helpful for these teams, along with prescribed burns, which help reduce the fuel that wildfires can spread with. So having this ability to do that safely and ease any hesitancy or trauma that a lot of neighborhoods and areas where they've experienced really stark wildfires, that's a way they can ease those tensions and also tackle it safely and in a controlled way. Hallie.
Maura Barrett, thank you very much. That does it for us for this hour. I will see you on Sunday on NBC Nightly News and right back here on Monday on NBC News Now. Have a great weekend. Tonight, that historic split screen for former President Trump. 2 huge court fights in 2 different cases. We've got every angle covered on his push to get a not guilty verdict in one courtroom and charges dismissed in another. Plus, shock and pain tonight over a Me Too milestone undone. The emotional tidal wave hitting Harvey Weinstein's accusers and alleged survivors after New York's top court overturned his rape conviction. We are live with what comes next in his case. Plus, hail the size of softballs, the tornado risk skyrocketing, why millions are bracing for the worst of the weather the Midwest has had in 5 years. Plus, in Ohio, new body cam video shows a man who ended up dying, telling police over and over again, "I can't breathe." We're looking at the disturbing footage that echoes the murder of George Floyd in just a minute. Plus, in tonight's original, a new exhibit giving visitors a place to mourn the hundreds killed when Hamas attacked a music festival in Israel on October 7th. That's coming up a little bit later in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and we are starting this day on this history-making moment for former President Trump. The split screen here, 2 huge court fights in 2 different cities on 2 different cases. One in Washington, where the Supreme Court's set to issue a ruling for the ages, and a ruling that could determine the fate of the federal case against Mr. Trump. That's in the building that's just a couple blocks from where I'm standing. But we'll start a little further north in New York, where we've just heard from Mr. Trump in the last hour or so, after he heard plenty from this man, David Pecker, tabloid king, former head of the National Enquirer, describing all the ways he tried to stop Mr. Trump from getting humiliated ahead of the 2016 election, telling a jury about the payments he helped facilitate to catch and then kill juicy stories, sex scandal-y stories, like the $150,000 that went to a former Playboy model, Karen McDougal. Pecker said Mr. Trump's former fixer, Michael Cohen, made those payments because he says we didn't want the story to embarrass Mr. Trump or the campaign. Pecker also admitted he straight up lied to the Wall Street Journal about paying off McDougal because I wanted to protect Donald Trump. But Pecker also said he didn't want to pay Stormy Daniels, who Mr. Trump denies having an affair with, saying, "I do not want the National Enquirer associated with a porn star." Remember what's at stake here, right? Donald Trump facing 34 criminal charges for falsifying business records. The Manhattan DA says this is all evidence that he interfered illegally with an election. Mr. Trump says he did nothing wrong. He did nothing illegal. We're going to get the breakdown from Danny Savalos in just a second. We're also going to talk about the Supreme Court of it all with Yamiche Alcindor. But we start with Vaughn Hilliard, who is live outside that court in downtown Manhattan. We saw David Pecker on the stand all day today, right? Basically start to finish. And it wrapped up with the defense cross-examining him in a cross that Donald Trump seemed very dialed in on here. Talk about the steps that the defense is taking to try to dismantle the prosecution's argument here by saying this is just how it works, that Donald Trump didn't get special treatment.
Right, in that the number one, he's not the only celebrity, but that fact is just an example of that, is that Donald Trump and him had a long-standing relationship of this well before he was running for political office, dating back to the 90s. Back when, in the early 2000s, he was doing the Celebrity Apprentice, that he would squash the negative stories about Donald Trump in exchange for good stories, you know, secret stories about what was happening behind the scenes at The Apprentice, just for example. And just look at part of the testimony and the exchange between Donald Trump's defense attorney and David Pecker. And just part of it, he is asked, quote, "You only published half the stories that you purchased." David Pecker responding, "I would say that's right." Emil Bove saying, quote, "AMI has used hundreds of thousands of source agreements for these purposes, correct?" David Pecker responding, "Yes." Again, the defense team making the suggestion that this was not just unique to Donald Trump, but this is just a thing that happens with celebrities like Donald Trump.
The other piece of this for the prosecution that was so important, Vaughn, and presumably why they started this huge high-profile trial with David Pecker, is to place Donald Trump in the room, to show that Donald Trump himself, it wasn't just Michael Cohen going off and freelancing, right? It wasn't just David Pecker of his own, you know, motivation in his heart doing all these catch-and-kill schemes, that Donald Trump himself was involved. Explain that piece and what we heard from Pecker on that today.
Right. With the Karen McDougal story, she was the former Playboy model who alleged a 10-month affair with Donald Trump. And what played out through the course of David Pecker's testimony was a timeline in which Donald Trump had engaged over the phone about the Karen McDougal story and whether David Pecker and AMI would purchase the rights to her story and to ensure that it didn't come out before the 2016 election. But then also the fact that after the election in December of 2016, as well as an additional meeting in January of 2017 when he was the president-elect, that David Pecker went to Trump Tower in Midtown Manhattan and had two separate meetings with Donald Trump in which Karen McDougal came up. And so this also then went to 2017 at the White House when allegedly Donald Trump invited David Pecker to come and even asked him how Karen was doing in reference to Karen McDougal. So these were several different phone calls and one-on-one meetings that were previously not known to the public until this testimony from David Pecker today.
Vaughn Hilliard, thank you very much. Yamiche, let me bring you in now outside Supreme Court, because where Vaughn is, it was all about the hush money trial, as it's called. Where you are, in the building behind you, it was all about this question of presidential immunity. It won't affect the hush money case, but it will affect several other cases that Donald Trump faces, several of his other legal issues. And the question is whether Donald Trump should basically be protected from criminal prosecution for stuff he did while president. Vibe check kind of seems to be a lot of skepticism from the justices that there should be like blanket immunity, but they really seem pretty far from any kind of super definitive ruling that would greenlight his federal trial right away.
That's right. The Supreme Court today, while hearing these really remarkable oral arguments, this historic day at the Supreme Court, they were really thinking about the idea that this could possibly be sent back to the district court, which would possibly be a win for former President Donald Trump, because he wants to delay this case, of course, because the November election is just around the corner. And I just want to note, Hallie, I know you're hearing some protesting here. It's been a wild day at the Supreme Court, but I also want to play for you some sound from Neil Gorsuch, of course, a conservative justice who was talking about this idea of what's at stake here. Take a listen.
I'm not concerned about this case, but I am concerned about future uses of the criminal law to target political opponents based on accusations about their motives.
Now, I also want to think about just the big picture here. There are two big questions before the court. What will exactly the justices rule, and when will they do it? What will they rule, of course, will be whether or not Donald Trump and future presidents, whether or not they'll have this broad immunity. And then, of course, when they do it will be key here, because, again, the election is just around the corner. Hallie?
Yeah, right. And any delay would be seen as a partial victory for the former president. That's what he wants, is to push this off till after November. One of the big questions, Yamiche, is you and I were watching this together during our special coverage right here on NBC News Now, was this question of a private act versus an official act. No question, really, and everybody sort of acknowledged that if it was a private act, you could be prosecuted for that. If you did something in your private capacity as president. On the official side of things, that's where there's a question mark. What would be prosecutable, et cetera. There was a real concession that Justice Amy Coney Barrett got the former president's attorney to make on this key point. Let me play the exchange.
So you concede that private acts don't get immunity?
We do.
That is critical to what you're talking about, Yamiche, on the delay piece of it, because if, in fact, some of these private acts could be prosecutable, presumably a case could move forward there. But if there's a question on the official acts also in the indictment, that's where things get thorny.
That's right. There's this gray area here. Though I should say, while the lawyers for special counsel Jack Smith, they did concede that there's some gray area here. They were very clear in the fact that they thought former President Trump did something that no one in history had done before, which is try to wrestle back an election that he lost. So really, while they were saying, yes, there is some gray news here, they were saying we really need to make sure that this president in particular is held accountable. This former president is held accountable for actions that were really trying to subvert democracy. But there is that gray area there. And that might be the area where you see the Supreme Court maybe have a split decision where they say, you know what, specifically, we're going to say we want to put this back to the district courts, but no, presidents don't have this broad immunity, which is what Trump's lawyer was trying to get today.
Yamiche Alcindor live for us there outside the Supreme Court. Yamiche, thank you so much for powering through. Appreciate it. Danny Savalos is joining us now. No protesters in the background of your live shot, Danny, which is a good thing here. But let's take both of these buckets, starting with that New York trial. Pick up, look ahead to tomorrow. Set the table a little bit, because the defense is going to pick up with this cross-examination of David Pecker.
Not a lot of surprises. I mean, there are really several different avenues you can go with a cooperating witness type. Number one, attack his memory. Number two, attack his motive or his bias to lie. And bias in the case of any cooperating witness is this guy got a benefit from the government. Maybe not just one government, not just the people of the state of New York, the state prosecutors, but maybe also the federal government as well. You want to explore that and raise the specter that his testimony is slanted in favor of the people he's trying to please, which are the prosecutors sitting there in the room watching his every word. Then also, you want to generally try and refute his earlier testimony and make it seem that, look, this is something you were going to do for Trump anyway. You did it for a lot of other people. This famous person, that famous person. This was just business as usual. It had nothing to do with the campaign. The campaign didn't make it special or unique.
The Karen McDougal story may set up the prosecution story for Stormy Daniels, right? But it's also the kind of thing that could maybe be used on appeal if the trial doesn't go his way.
Yeah, possibly. I was thinking about that today because the case of Harvey Weinstein just got overturned, his conviction vacated. He's getting a new trial. And it was on the same basis of this kind of prior bad acts evidence. Now, I think probably on appeal, this stuff comes in. But prosecutors beware. When you try to load the dump truck up with all the bad things somebody did in the past, then, you know, there's always a chance if you get that conviction, it could be overturned on appeal. But this kind of course of conduct is probably okay, even though the McDougal transaction is not one of the charged crimes, and even though it really it was kind of different than the Stormy Daniels transaction ultimately, it still probably comes in, probably survives appeal, but it's certainly an issue if there's a conviction.
Let's quickly touch on the Supreme Court thing, because I want to sort of maybe wrap up with this fine point on it. What is happening at the Supreme Court today and what will happen when their ruling comes down goes well beyond this particular person, Donald Trump, at this particular moment during the 2024 election year. As Justice Gorsuch put it, this will be a ruling for the ages. Whatever they decide could have a multi-generational impact. And this issue of checks and balances, consequences for any sitting president, is what Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson tried to get at, one of the more liberal justices. Let me play what she said to put this into a broader context.
I'm trying to understand what the disincentive is from turning the Oval Office into, the seat of criminal activity in this country.
To her, that is one of the risks here, right? If you end up granting some sort of broad immunity to a sitting president here. What's your sense of how this goes?
It's so hard to boil this down, but I think I can do it. In essence, Trump's team is arguing we get absolute immunity for anything that's remotely official, and what he did was official. And the government is really arguing, okay, what he said, no. But we don't really want to get into the details of what presidential immunity is. It's just whatever Trump says he's immune for, he shouldn't be immune for. But the Supreme Court justices seem to recognize today that, no. We have a greater burden than just deciding this issue. The issue of presidential immunity is really uncharted territory. We know it exists. We don't know the contours. To what degree the Supreme Court defines those contours is their burden.
Danny Savalos, you do have a way with words, as always. Thank you, sir. We'll talk 1,000 more times over the course of the next 6 weeks, I'm sure. Appreciate it. Elsewhere in New York tonight, new fallout after the bombshell ruling overturning one of the most monumental decisions in the Me Too movement, Harvey Weinstein's rape conviction. That's because an appeals court in New York ruled the judge in that 2020 trial made some mistakes. And the biggest one, letting other women testify about allegations against Weinstein that were not part of the actual charges he faced. To be crystal clear here, Harvey Weinstein is not a free man. He's staying behind bars for now. And he still faces, of course, that 16-year sentence for rape in California. But here's what this whole thing probably does mean. A new trial for him in New York. They may do it all again. And some of the women who shared their story on the stand may have to do that all over again, too. Remember, Weinstein's downfall was basically the biggest domino, one of the biggest, in the chain reaction that was the Me Too movement. And now Weinstein accusers and activists say this is a step in the wrong direction.
This is what it's like to be a woman in America. living with male entitlement to our bodies. This today is an act of institutional betrayal.
One well-known case does not define this movement.
As for Weinstein's lawyers, you will not be surprised to learn they see it differently. They say this moment is an indication that the justice system works.
I don't care who the defendant is. If it's a former president of the United States or the most storied Hollywood producer of our generation, the law applies to everyone. No one is above the law, but no one is below the law either.
I want to bring in Kate Snow for more on this. And Kate, you covered the Me Too movement for years. You covered this case. You covered many others. You talked to some accusers, some others, some alleged survivors here. Tell us about some of the fallout tonight, some of the pain, some of the anger, some of the frustration that we're hearing.
Well, those are all the right words, Hallie. Pain, frustration, anger. I talked to two women who were not part of this case, but are among the more than 100 accusers of Harvey Weinstein. And they said it was visceral for them this morning when they found out about this news, that they were shaking and they were stunned by this overturning. We have a couple of statements that we can show you. We got a statement from attorneys who represent many of these Weinstein accusers. And you see Douglas Wigdor saying today's decision is a major step back in holding those accountable for acts of sexual violence. Overturning the verdict is tragic in that it will require the victims to endure yet another trial. And then Lindsay Goldbrum saying this ruling is a leap backward for the rule of law. Today's ruling, unfortunately, casting a dark shadow on their bravery and will undoubtedly deter future sexual assault victims from coming forward in the first place. We did get one statement, Hallie, from one of the women who testified during this trial. She was one of those, as you described, the women that weren't part of the charges, but testified nonetheless. And that's the whole sort of what this decision today hinges on, right? But this woman said, preparing for the trial took 2 years of my life. People have asked me if I regret testifying, and my answer is a resounding no, Hallie.
So what is the next step, Kate? Are we going to have to do this all over again? What are the chances? And if that happens, when would a new trial even begin?
Yeah. All good questions. Here's what I know. I just moments ago spoke with a spokesperson for Harvey Weinstein. He is in upstate New York right now. They're going to move him closer to New York City as they wait to see what the district attorney here does. The DA has said in Manhattan that they will do everything in their power to retry this case. Listen to those words. Everything in their power. Does that mean they're going to do a new trial? We're not exactly sure. And what would that look like? Would it be the same three women who originally were those that were associated with the criminal charges? Maybe they don't all want to participate anymore. We just don't know. And Hallie, you mentioned that 16-year sentence in California. His LA attorney tonight, different team of lawyers, saying that the New York decision today has a significant impact on their appeal of that conviction in LA. And they're saying that the LA trial court judge, in their words, made the same errors that the New York trial judge made, and therefore they are appealing and think that they have a better case on appeal now.
It's a lot, Kate. It's a lot to continue reporting on. I know you and our team will be pulling on those threads. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing that with us. We're looking forward to seeing more, of course, from Kate on NBC News Daily every day from 2 to 4 o'clock Eastern right here, and, of course, on your local broadcast station as well. Kate, thank you. Sure. Just a few hours ago, out west, the University of Southern California, USC, announcing it is canceling its main graduation commencement ceremony. It's going to cancel it, the big one, the one that thousands and thousands of people show up to because of this dramatic escalation between pro-Palestinian protesters and police on campus. Something student activists said not too long ago is unacceptable. Listen.
These are incomprehensible accounts of police brutality, co-signed and facilitated by the USC administration, that turned our campus into a militarized zone.
I'm going to show you some of the footage here. These intense clashes between protesters and security officers. Police say nearly 100 people have been arrested. And as we've been on the air, even in just the last 45 minutes or so, new protests are popping up. We're just getting this new video in out of the University of Pennsylvania. More demonstrations there today. More demonstrations also, as you see them here on this map here in Washington, George Washington University. Big, larger than usual police presence being reported. At UCLA, over on the left side, the school is restricting access to some parts of campus. Overall, you are seeing just scenes like these from coast to coast. Watch this.
Free, free, free Palestine.
That stretches down to Texas as well, which is where we find Guad Venegas out at UT Austin. David Noriega is at UCLA in California. David, let me start with you and what's happening on the West Coast here, specifically with USC, this big event that typically brings in a ton of people. They'll still do the smaller commencements for like divisions, right, for different majors, et cetera, but it's all about security, the school says. Explain that.
Yeah, Hallie, so in the email that USC sent to students, they made sure to specify that the smaller graduation ceremonies will still happen. Parents will still get photos of their kids getting a diploma. It's that big central commencement ceremony that has 65,000 people gathering in one place that's been canceled. Now, interestingly, that email says nothing about protests. It says nothing about Palestine or Israel. It just says these are security concerns. They're implementing security measures such as everyone who gets on campus needs to have a commencement ticket. They're going to be screening people in bags. People need to be carrying clear bags. That said, students, for the most part, understand that this is all related to the protests and specifically to what happened about a week ago where the commencement valedictorian speaker her speech was canceled. Again, the university said this was a question of security, but it's generally understood that this has something to do with the fact that she has pretty publicized pro-Palestine views. A lot of students are pretty devastated by this, by the way. One student texted us saying that this war is ripping their campus apart. Hallie?
What about at UCLA where you are, David? I'm looking behind you. I know you've had a chance to get out there to talk with some of the demonstrators that have gathered. Tell us more.
Yeah, so there's a really sharp contrast, Hallie, between the way different universities are responding to this. Here at UCLA, also at UC Berkeley, administrators seem to be taking a step back, letting these encampments grow, letting them, allowing students to express themselves in the way that they are, compared to what's happening in Texas, what's happening in New York, what's happening in other parts of the country, where universities are really pretty quickly calling law enforcement to disperse these gatherings. I've been interviewing students involved in this encampment today. I want to play you bits of interviews with two of them that I did. Take a listen.
Calling something like this anti-Semitic, where I and many other Jews feel comfortable and are in fact welcomed as Jews, really does a grave disservice both to this movement that's upholding the values of justice, equality, and dignity for all people, and to the very idea of Jewish safety.
We don't care what they do to us, because we're here for Palestine. So we're here until Palestine is free, and we're here until our demands are met.
Hallie, the big question now with these encampments that the universities are allowing to stay is how long will they last? If we are to believe that's that last student that you heard from, they're willing to stay out here pretty much indefinitely. Hallie?
That was the question, right? How long? And if indefinitely is the answer, that is super interesting. David Noriega, thank you so much there in Cali. Let me go to Texas now, where Guad Venegas is posted up. We saw things took a turn yesterday. Sounds like a lot of students and faculty were not super happy with how things were handled, which is part of the reason why we see them out behind you today.
Hallie, a lot of anger from students and members of the faculty here today, upset because of what happened yesterday. You can see a group that's still out here today. So what they had here was a walkout yesterday and another walkout today. It was a much larger group earlier. You can see them now having a discussion, and we were there just minutes ago. That discussion happening is about how they should act when they protest. Now, a lot of these protesters are here in support of Palestine. Earlier today, it was very loud but peaceful. A lot of them told me that they wanted to come out today because of the way the university handled things yesterday. We know that the university administrators and the president called state troopers. They've been very criticized because of that. In fact, after the incident happened yesterday with that standoff between the troopers and the students, the president shared a statement saying the protesters were intending to violate university's rules and occupy campus, but never gave more details. Now, today, we saw members of the faculty, a lot of professors that came up to us and told us they had serious concerns because of what happened yesterday. And one of the professors also showed me an email that was sent internally from the faculty council in which they said they had concerns because of the administrators and the president's decision to bring in the state troopers and also the way they brought them in. They came in with riot gear. A lot of them were on horses. And the biggest difference between what we're seeing here today and what we saw earlier with the large numbers and yesterday is that today we did not have the state troopers arrive. We did have have some of the campus police. They watch nearby. We have a few that are still left in some areas, but it's been a complete different scene here. Again, the biggest difference is that the state troopers did not arrive. Another thing that was very interesting earlier today, Hallie, is we had the protesters, the majority of them in support of Palestine, and right next to them, a number of students were waving Israeli flags in support of Israel, both protesting side to side without having a conflict, without authorities being present. Hallie?
Guad Venegas live for us there in Austin. Guad, thank you. In Texas and beyond, what's expected to be the most active and dangerous stretch of storms that area has seen in years, with millions of people bracing for maybe softball-sized hail, even tornadoes possibly hitting after dark. And you know that's when twisters are twice as likely to be deadly. We're talking Kansas City down to Dallas. It could all last through the weekend. Meteorologist Bill Cairns is tracking it. They're bracing for not just 1 or 2 days of bad weather, but 4 of potentially devastating storms.
Yeah, what's unusual, Hallie, is that it's going to be in the same similar areas. Typically, we take these storms and we track the severe weather, from the plains to the East Coast eventually. Not this time. We're actually just going to reload and keep it right in the middle in the heartland. So we've already have an active weather pattern setting up for tonight. 2 tornado watches are up. I've already seen at least pictures of 4 or 5 tornadoes in the last hour. They've been all very small, what we call landspout tornadoes or little ropes. Haven't done any damage or anything like that, but just kind of gives you an indication of how ripe the atmosphere is and that things are setting up, to stay this way all weekend long. These little red symbols here show you where 2 tornadoes were reported with this thunderstorm to the north. We were tracking last hour a tornado warning with this storm. That's now a severe thunderstorm warning, and new storms are really popping up here in western Kansas. So that's probably where the stormiest weather is going to be. And you'll notice here, this is all hail-producing storms that are heading north of McDonald now in western Kansas. So what are we going to deal with over the weekend? All of the storms are going to track, for the most part, starting in Kansas and Oklahoma and then heading east. And then we're going to repeat this as we go into Saturday and Sunday. So tomorrow, we're talking Des Moines, Omaha, Kansas City, areas right around Joplin, possibly Tulsa, Fort Smith, Arkansas. And this area is where we could see significant tornadoes tomorrow at this time. That includes Omaha to Kansas City towards Des Moines. And then by the time we even get to Saturday, then we're back in the I-35 corridor. So day after day of this, Hallie, in the same areas that has multiple problems, not just the severe weather, but flooding too.
Bill Cairns, thank you very much. Lots to watch for over the course of the next 72 hours or so. Thanks. A lot more to watch for here on this show, too, because coming next, some wild scenes out of Nigeria where the government's scrambling to recapture more than 100 escaped prisoners. Plus, Giselle's traffic stop blues, the tough moment the supermodel had on the road. Tonight, police in Ohio are releasing new body cam footage showing a man who became unresponsive during his arrest, was later pronounced dead at a hospital. His last words heard in the footage, "I can't breathe." In the video, we hear Frank Tyson yell those words out at least 7 times as cops try to subdue him, with one officer putting a knee on his upper back for about 40 seconds. We are only going to show you that moment once, and we have to warn you here, it is incredibly disturbing.
I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't. Get on my neck. I can't breathe.
That's the story right there. I'll be glad to appreciate it for you.
Okay. I can't breathe.
You're fine.
Yep.
Shut up.
This all happened last Thursday when Tyson allegedly crashed his car into a pole in Canton before running into a nearby bar. You can see here police finding the damaged pole and what they say is Tyson's car nearby before bystanders directed the officers into the bar where Tyson was. An altercation, a tussle between Tyson and the officers starts nearly immediately. That's when they start trying to take him to the ground. The coroner says Tyson's cause of death is still pending. The officers involved are on paid administrative leave while officials investigate. There is, of course, some very obvious overlap with the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis here, who was murdered by a police officer who kept his knee on Floyd's neck for nearly 10 minutes as he, too, cried out, "I can't breathe." Floyd's death and his last words becoming a rallying cry for the Black Lives Matter movement, spurring huge protests against police brutality in this country. NBC's Dana Griffin is following this one for us. And Dana, we'll get to that overlap again, not an apples-to-apples comparison, but let's start with this video, which shows almost everything from start to finish over the course of 35 minutes. Explain that and where things go from here.
Yeah, and I want to walk you through that timeline. And I think there are 3 key moments here when you look through this video that lasted some 35 minutes from the time they arrived. 40 seconds an officer kept his knee on Frank Tyson's back. And then it took about 5 minutes, 29 seconds between the time he last said, "I cannot breathe," and the first time we actually see officers check his pulse. An additional 3 minutes go by before they start doing CPR. Now, I think what's most disturbing about this video, as you mentioned, they weren't holding him down for several minutes as people pleaded with officers to ask them to get off, but it's the what happened after he was in handcuffs. And you notice that he was very combative, yelling out, "Call the sheriff." And there's actually a woman in that video who says, "No, they're here to help you." So it's clear that he's in some sort of mental crisis or health crisis here. And even when officers get him handcuffed, he doesn't make a peep. To go from being so combative to not saying a word should have been the first indication. You later see the officers making jokes about, at least one of those officers making a joke about always wanting to be in a bar fight. And it wasn't until they looked down and realized something's not right here that they finally call an ambulance. But it still took several minutes, even after that ambulance was called, for them to start administering CPR. Listen to what else they said during that body cam video.
Did he calm down?
Yeah, he might be out.
Breathing? Did he have a pulse?
I didn't feel one. Can you tell medics to step it up? It was not responsive. I don't know if I can feel a pulse.
So both of those Canton police officers are now on paid administrative leave as the department investigates. And actually, there's a state department that's actually taking over this investigation. And the mayor says that they plan to be very transparent about what comes out in that investigation. Hallie?
We talked about how Tyson's death is coming nearly at the 4-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. There were so many promises of police reform back then, including, in some instances, the suggestion for reforming tactics that restrict the way that a suspect can breathe. Talk us through that piece of this, Dana.
Yeah, and I think, Hallie, just those haunting words of "I can't breathe," we've heard in several cases where people were killed they died after pleading with officers to help them. And this was the same plea that this man made in this video. And I think with a lot of police departments after the murder of George Floyd, there were talks about, you got rid of the carotid chokehold because of what happened to George Floyd. There was talks about not keeping detainees in that prone position with their faces down. A moment you saw this person with his face in the carpet. And so it raises the questions of why was he not flipped over? Why was he not checked on immediately after being put in those handcuffs? And a lot of those questions will hopefully be answered in this investigation. Hallie?
Dana Griffin, thank you very much for that reporting for us tonight. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about. Number 1, new reporting out tonight from Reuters suggesting TikTok's Chinese-based owner would rather shut it down than sell it off, according to 4 sources talking with Reuters. That's if the company's legal fight is not successful against the new law President Biden just signed that gives ByteDance up to a year to spin off TikTok or face a ban. Number 2, birth rates in the United States now dropping to the lowest they've been in nearly a century. This brand new CDC report saying births in this country dipped down in 2023 to 3.6 million, like 76,000 fewer births than the year before, restarting this trend of birth rates plunging down and down after a little bump up after the year 1 of the pandemic. Number 3, take a look at this police body cam video showing Giselle Bundchen getting emotional during a traffic stop in Florida. She told the officer she was trying to get away from somebody, maybe like paparazzi, it seemed. Listen.
I was just trying to escape from that guy.
I understand who you are. I know that. I'll give you a... There's nothing I can do about that.
No, but he's talking.
You see the officer saying he can't prevent people from doing their job if it's taking pictures. She was let go with just a warning for erratic driving. Number 4, big new audio version of all 7 Harry Potter books is headed to Audible. Variety says more than 100 actors will be involved, full cast. We don't know who yet, but the release is set for late next year. Number 5, check this out. Spiders on Mars? Ugh. It's not, but it looks like it. The European Space Agency says it's actually from these, basically gas geysers that shoot up during this time of year on Mars and then splotch back down. Still to come. Haitians getting a new prime minister. We'll talk about the last straw that got their old one to go. That's next. And the iconic Parisian structure collapsing to the ground. What city leaders are saying about that investigation tonight. Next. NBC News covers hundreds of international stories every day, and because it can be tough to read or watch or listen to them all, our teams around the world have done it for you. Here's a look at what they're watching in a segment we call The Global. Out of Nigeria, more than 100 inmates now on the run after escaping from a prison there. They snuck out when the prison fence got destroyed in really heavy rain that all wrecked the wall and some buildings, too. So far, officials say they've recaptured 10 of the fugitives and say they're in their words, hot chase for the rest. Out of Haiti, the country's prime minister officially resigning in the last couple hours after months of gang violence and unrest across Haiti. The economy and finance minister will now step in as interim prime minister until the new council chooses the permanent leader, along with a new cabinet, to try to get control of what's happening. And out of France, take a look at this. Pretty startling scene. The windmill blades on top of the iconic Moulin Rouge building crashing down to the ground. There they are. Nobody really knows why it happened, but apparently it wasn't intentional. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. Officials are investigating, but TBD on when that landmark windmill will go back up. To Israel now, where the parents of an American-Israeli hostage being held by Hamas in Gaza today, telling our Raf Sanchez what happened when they saw video of their son alive.
I mean, initially, we were just crying. This was a tremendous validation. And on the other hand, we see him, he's in captivity. He's obviously suffering with this missing dominant arm.
He certainly doesn't look like himself, but it was amazing to see him and amazing to see that he speaks like himself with clarity and strength.
Now, remember, Hamas had released a video of their son, Hirsch, showing him speaking in Hebrew, calling on the Israeli government to make a deal to release the remaining hostages in Gaza, this propaganda video that was out. It's not immediately clear. We don't know for sure when this video was recorded or whether he's still alive now. That brings us to tonight's original now with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been watching. And tonight, we're taking you inside the moments before, during, and after Hamas attacked the Nova Music Festival in Israel on October 7th. When more than 360 concertgoers were killed that day, and dozens, including Hirsch, Goldberg, Poland, who you just saw, were taken hostage. Now, a new exhibit in New York gives visitors a place to remember. We've got to warn you here, some of what you're about to see is graphic. Here's Chloe Malas.
Tonight, the horrifying moment the Nova Music Festival was attacked by Hamas militants in Israel on October 7th. It's now being recreated for the American public in downtown Manhattan at an exhibit called The Moment Music Stood Still, honoring the 360 dead and 44 taken hostage that day. The 50,000 square foot space includes salvaged items from the festival, including original tents, cars that were lit on fire, bullet-ridden porta potties, and a lost and found of unclaimed items. Record executive Scooter Braun helped bring it here from Tel Aviv.
This is the biggest massacre in music history.
The exhibit deeply personal for Braun, who's the grandson of Holocaust survivors.
When Americans come to this exhibit, what are you hoping that they take away?
Look, these are actual cars that terrorists destroyed. This could have been anywhere, and I think it's important that we see ourselves in others so we can have some humanity for them. This one's really tough for me. Growing up in a Holocaust family, there's a lot of images of just piles of shoes. And that should not happen.
And survivors of that tragic day are now showing up to view the exhibit, including Ophir Amar, one of the producers of the music festival. He says when he first heard the rockets overhead, he wasn't initially worried.
Then we look up in the sky and we see these hundreds of rockets being shot at us. When you live in Israel, you see rockets, you don't get like they said. It's unfortunately it's normal.
But things took a terrifying turn when he witnessed hundreds of festival goers who had initially left after hearing the rockets begin running back to the festival grounds.
We suddenly see around 200 people running back from the main road. And at this point, we also hear the bullets, the shootings. You hear them shooting automatic. We immediately heard the sound, so we know that these are terrorists shooting.
Amar and some friends immediately jumped into a van and began trying to make their escape, but they got caught in gunfire.
While they shot at us, I was talking to my wife on the phone, and my wife was 9 months pregnant at home at that day. So the engine was hit. We're rolling with the car because the car is not going anymore. The driver turned into this orange field, and once we stopped with the car, they took me out of the car, couldn't move, and it's pain that I never felt before. And when I tried to move my leg, I could feel immediately that I will pass out. So I was lying next to the car. What do I do if they come? So I started to take my blood and smear it on my face. And then there's this dilemma. If they come, maybe I open the bandage and bleed out, because it's better to die than to be a hostage if they take me hostage to Gaza.
Lee Saucy, a 26-year-old American citizen, took refuge in a nearby bomb shelter with a small group that included her uncle Avi, who was killed in the attack.
I was by the doorway, like in the entrance. The terrorists, what they did is they didn't enter the bomb shelter after the first attack because there was so much blood and so many bodies. It was slippery. So they would take the hand grenades, they'd unhook it, they'd throw it, and the grenade would hit the wall and would fall in the doorway, like the entry of the bomb shelter, and it would explode there. And I'm sitting right there. So every time I would put bodies in the doorway to kind of shield the people that are alive from getting hit. And so every 3 hours, I had to add more bodies on top of each other to protect us. But it's just amazing what adrenaline does to you.
Saucy didn't think she'd make it, so she texted her mom.
I sent my mom a text message. I sent her my iCloud and username and password, and I said, Mom, I have all this information on my phone. If I die, go here. So I took my phone out and I made a message to send to my mom, telling her how much I love her.
26-year-old Danielle DeVere said she hid from the gunman in an orange grove.
I had this scarf on me, which I got before the festival because I thought the color is cute. I saw orange trees in the same color, so I thought maybe use the scarf as a camouflage. You can hear people screaming everywhere, boys and girls holding each other, and the boy's trying to get his girlfriend with him, but she can't run as fast as him, and he started crying. And all I'm thinking about is that I need to go past everybody I see because they're surrounding me and they're behind me. And if they shoot somebody, I need to stay alive. I don't want my parents to find me here dead.
Braun and exhibit organizers aim to focus on the lives directly affected at the festival.
You can come and see this exhibit and be here for these music lovers and call out for the hostages, and still, at the same time, have the empathy in your heart to call out for innocent people in Gaza to be protected.
Would you ever have another music festival again?
Even though the worst happened to us and unimaginable, and we stand so strong behind this message, and this is our whole meaning and purpose.
A journey of healing that they say starts with looking toward the future.
This is a message to everyone. We will dance again, and we will do anything in our power to get to this point.
Chloe Malas, NBC News, New York.
Coming up, it is draft season. Every eye on one of football's up-and-comers on one of the biggest nights of his life. That's next. Want to take you to Detroit tonight, where the stakes and the salaries at this year's NFL draft are higher than ever. Take a look at this live shot from the crowds downtown. There they are. Woo, that's a lot of people. The first pick's not even happening for a few hours yet. The Chicago Bears up first are expected to draft the guy you're about to see here, Caleb Williams, who experts think could be the next Patrick Mahomes. No pressure. Totally chill. Only a guy who won 3 Super Bowls in his first 6 years as a starter. That's like already Hall of Fame territory. The Bears even traded their first-round pick from just 3 years ago, Justin Fields, so they could be in position to draft Williams. And this is a sign of a trend in the last few years, where the NFL is becoming all about the quarterback. In fact, it's possible the first 4 picks in the draft are going to be all QBs. That has never happened before. I want to bring in Steve Patterson. So big deal, big moment for the NFL, and a big spotlight on quarterbacks, and especially on Caleb Williams.
Yeah, Caleb Williams is the truth. Imagine this, being so good that the team that wants you traded for a chance to get you 3 frickin' years ago. That's the situation with Caleb Williams. Chicago knew that this was coming. They traded their quarterback. They're like, let's get rid of him 3 years ago in anticipation of the possibility of maybe getting this guy. And he is the truth. I mean, so, right, like looking at the trends of the NFL, one of the pieces for these big generational teams, the dynasties, is that they have generational talent at quarterback. You want a Brady. You want a John Elway. You want a Patrick Mahomes. And Mahomes is stylistically the closest thing we've seen to Caleb Williams, except at this point in his college career, Caleb Williams is even better. Hallie.
Which is bananas to think about here. The other trend that we've seen, Steve, because we like to kind of get the macro picture here on this show, as you know.
Sure.
The NFL is big business, and for these players, it is big money. It is life-changing money, not just for Caleb Williams, right, but for all the players here. Talk about that trend line that we've seen that seems to be fueled and driven by the intense interest in the NFL that keeps growing.
Yeah, I'm going to read some numbers, and after this, I don't want you to feel bad for anybody in the NFL ever again. Absolutely. The league minimum, just so you know, $750,000. That is just coming into the league. If you are a bench warmer's understudy of the bench warmer, that's how much money you make at a minimum. The average is $2.8 million, but look at this. These are the rounds in which you can expect the salary range, $12 to $38 million. That's probably for the first round pick, right? Somewhere around $40 million. And then all the way down in the 7th round, the last few rounds of the draft, $4 million. That is incredible money. I think it is even in more stark relief because of all this discussion about women's athletics, spurred, of course, by Caitlin Clark, looking at the WNBA, talking about her salary that, of course, doesn't account for all the NIL deals and other things that are going on to help those athletes. But it's, you know, it's ridiculous how much money they make. And it is because of this intense interest. Everybody watches the NFL. They love the NFL. You showed that crowd in Detroit. That is for people to watch essentially a screen of people walking up on stage for 30 seconds and then leaving. That's how crazy the interest is for that sport. It's wild. Hallie?
Yeah, and you're jealous of it, Steve, and I know you wish you had that assignment in Detroit.
Course.
Yeah.
I would trade anything to be there.
Go watch it on a different screen, friend. Maybe enjoy a beverage or two. Thank you, Steve Patterson. Appreciate it. After this, we are looking at whether it could be Hollywood to the rescue, perhaps, how Tinseltown special effects guys could end up being the real-life heroes when it comes to fighting fires. Tonight, new red flag warnings in Colorado. And remember, it's only spring. So with these stronger fires happening more often, it's coming a demand for a new way to get a handle on them. Could the answer come from Hollywood? Maura Barrett takes us to the state, where a former special effects coordinator is trying something in Colorado typically found on movie sets.
Tonight, fears growing among fire officials that wildfire season is no longer only a few months long, but the whole year.
Now the deadliest wildfire.
Fast-moving wildfire.
Tana wildfire.
Fiery nightmares.
With one saying he has a 24/7 catastrophic wildfire mindset these days.
Any fires that we have that start here are going to go rapidly up the hillsides, get caught by heavy winds, and be blown east and grow exponentially fast.
Brett Gibson and Greg Schwab are both fire chiefs in Boulder County, Colorado, and they're looking for innovative new ways to fight fires that are spreading faster than usual.
What do you attribute that to?
We're getting hotter, drier, and windier. We're having more extreme weather.
Those conditions, unfortunately, creating the perfect recipe for Colorado's largest and most destructive fires in the last 4 years. Red flag warnings this spring already issued. In the U.S. alone, wildfires can cause up to $350 billion in damages annually, putting the pressure on the need to find new solutions for fire prevention and suppression. Steve Wolf, CEO of Team Wildfire, has caught the attention of fire officials with what he calls a hurricane on wheels. The idea sparked from his time as a Hollywood special effects coordinator.
We took technology that had been used to make weather on movie sets and converted that to a mobile platform so that firefighters could control the wind and the rain in the microclimate where they're fighting the fire.
This small jet engine, usually found on a military drone, can shoot mist, be it water or fire retardant, hundreds of miles per hour, reaching nearly 200 feet away.
So this would allow us to convert any fire truck that normally just squirts water. It flows up into the mist injection chamber, which has 180 micro jets, all driving water into the center.
And then it just forces
And then
it
the
out.
jet engine exhaust just pushes it out.
Is this also what combats all of the wind issues that they face?
That's right.
Because it's going faster.
Right, because you're pushing back with so much force, and because wind that has moisture in it weighs more, you can punch right into the inbound winds.
With input from the fire chiefs, Wolf plans to scale up in size to devices 50 times bigger to help fight fires across an array of landscapes.
I'm impatiently waiting to see the tractor-mounted big rig. Only because boys and big toys.
New tech like this developing across the country that can hopefully be used in conjunction with one another, like the LA Fire Department's Thermite RS3, a robot used for complex structure fires, and Lockheed Martin's AI technology used to predict a fire's path. How important is it that new technology continues to be developed given how much we're seeing in the changes of climate and the frequency of fires?
We embrace all technologies. We do want to prove them.
This is a very labor-intensive business, and everybody who's on the ground is at risk. Anything that we can do to reduce that, let's try it.
New tech now giving new hope to millions who find themselves under threats of massive wildfires every year.
Maura is back from her reporting trip. She is joining us now. Maura, you talk about new tech and new hope, but there is also a new timeline on this. It is not just like a post-summer heat kind of thing where we used to see wildfires spike. This is a threat that is year-round.
Exactly, Hallie. And the thing that firefighters focus on when it's happening year-round is the suppression when it's actually happening, right? But also the prevention leading up to it. And the tech that we showed you in that piece actually has the ability to use that same jet engine to spray water, fire retardant ahead of time on roads or in areas where wildfires can spread easily to prevent them from jumping back and forth. And so that's something that can also be helpful for these teams, along with prescribed burns, which help reduce the fuel that wildfires can spread with. So having this ability to do that safely and ease any hesitancy or trauma that a lot of neighborhoods and areas where they've experienced really stark wildfires, that's a way they can ease those tensions and also tackle it safely and in a controlled way. Hallie.
Maura Barrett, thank you very much. That does it for us for this hour. I will see you on Sunday on NBC Nightly News and right back here on Monday on NBC News Now. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.